Good morning, children. I hope you have seen the previous video of the Muslim League, children, and where I have discussed about the separate electorate concept, right? Because Muslim League started, before the formation of Muslim League, the Muslims community started, demanding for representation of the seats, right, in Legislative Council, which has already, in Legislative Council, where Indian National Congress has already sent its members earlier. Clear, children. And INC was founded in the year 1885, everyone knows, where they have, they asked for one demand, and that demand was fulfilled. Was that, children, if you remember, that they wanted more and more Indian representation, in Legislative Council. So on the same way, in the same track here, Muslims too wanted the representation in the Legislative Council, right? And their demands was somehow fulfilled by the Britishers, and Britishers accepted their demand ki, okay, fine, they will give them what, the separate representation in the Legislative Council, right? And what they did, these Britishers, obviously they always wanted to create and implemented divide and rule policy, so they have introduced in the election system was what class, they have introduced a separate electorate system where Muslim vote for Muslim and Hindus vote for Hindus, right? This was known as separate electorate. That means they paved the way for divide and rule policy. That means Indian National Congress members also, they were also there in Legislative Council, and now Muslims too started getting the seats in Legislative Council. But the manner of election was quite different. Here the elections will be there in the form of separate electorate, where Hindu candidate will be voted by Hindus and Muslim candidates will be voted by Muslims. This I have already explained you in the previous video, so do listen to that video attentively, right? So this video is in continuation with that. Let's start now. Okay, children, so after that, after asking for a number of seats in the Legislative Council, here few Muslims representation, and here they have selected their head, known by the name of Aga Khan, and they have presented few demands on 1st October 1906 in front of the Britishers, and they wanted these demands to be fulfilled, right? If you remember, children, in the same manner the demanded was presented in front of the Britishers by Indian National Congress also, and if you remember their demands, they also started asking for different demands, right, children? If you want to remember this point, you need to refer to the previous videos, right? You will get everything, right, children? So here in the demands, what they asked for: separate electorate, the right of sending the representatives to the provincial council. Here the very first demand which Muslims asked for was what class? They wanted the right of sending the representatives to the provincial councils, right? Councils, the body which was formed at the provinces level. Provinces means present time states, right, children? Next, weightage and representation, the position they occupied in 100 years. They wanted the representation, legislative and executive council, not in the manner of their, not in the case of their on their population, right? Because they knew this very well, they were in minority, right? So how they wanted the more number of representation in legislative council, children? They wanted to occupy and they simply presented, they simply asked from the Britishers ki they wanted the seats equivalent to the position which they have occupied for years in India, right? Means they wanted Britishers to refer to their history, right? And in history, if you remember, children, the coming of Delhi Sultanate and after that Mughal Empire paved the glorious years, right, children? And this way they wanted their representation, right? Next, separate representation, the municipal and university, it's a university body. It's basically university body, means school, college level bodies, right? They wanted the representation. And two, they wanted representation municipal, that means local level bodies. That means they wanted their representation in every field, in all administrative department, right, including legislative council, executive council, then municipal boards, then universities boards, right? So that they can compete with the other community, right, children? Next, if you see greater representation, civil, military and judicial services, then they ask for greater representation in civil, military and judicial services. Next, the founding of a Muslim university, and last but not the least, if you remember, children, here Sir Syed Ahmad Khan has founded in the year 1875 the Muhammadan Anglo-Oriental College, which later came to be known as Aligarh Muslim University, right? And with this, what they decided ki here, because they need the funds from the Britishers, so their one motto of founding this university was what, children? I have already explained in the previous video, that to show loyalty towards the Britishers, right? So this demand they asked from the Britishers. So all these demands they have presented in a polite manner in presence of the Britishers, right, children? So I hope so people have understood that before going for objectives, in the same manner the Indian National Congress did, right? First they asked for demands, and later on, after formation, they simply set their objectives. In the same way, the Muslims demanded before formation of the league, before forming their body. Don't get confused, right? So these are the demands they have asked from the Britishers, right, children? Now, next, Lord Minto's assurance. Now, Lord Minto, he was the Viceroy of India during that time period, and he has assured the Muslims. See what assurance he has given. He said the political rights and demands of Muslims would be duly safeguarded, right? Parliamentary reform of 1909. Now, this reform was a very important reform class, and this reform have paved the way for divide rule policy. Like earlier, they did partition of Bengal, and this, later on, after 40 years, if you remember, after 40 to 42 years, they will simply divide India into two dominions, India and Pakistan. So all these were the bases they have created. The parliamentary reform, was a very first reform where they have, promised the Muslims that they would safeguard their rights, and they simply scared the Muslims. What they have scared the Muslims against the Hindu community, against the Indian National Congress, right? If suppose they simply scared the Muslims, and how they scared them, they simply asked them, if they simply tell them if they leave India, right, and who will dominate in all the spaces, in all the sphere, it would be Hindu and Indian National Congress. So what happened? What Muslims did, like instead of joining the hands like both Hindu and Muslim community, they started parting their ways, they started separating themselves, right? So here, let's see what was the Morley Minto reform. Lord Morley was the Viceroy, Lord Minto too was the Viceroy, class children. Here see, the separate representation of the Muslim community in the Imperial and Provincial Legislative Council, right? They simply, at last they fulfilled the demands of the Muslims, and they said, okay, fine, from now onwards they would give them separate representation of the Muslim community in the Imperial and Provincial Legislative Council. Don't get confused, children, these were all bodies of the parliament, right, during that time period. Then it implied that community would serve as the basis for representation, but how they would be representing, how they simply they simply fulfilled their representatives representations. Here the Britishers simply asked them to go for separate electorate, and I've already explained you, separate electorate means Muslim candidate would be voted by Muslims and Hindu candidate would be voted by Hindus. That means they simply did divide and rule policy in the manner of elections, right, children? Next, if you see, the Muslim would vote for Muslim candidate and Hindus vote for Hindu candidate, the fatal blow to the unity of India, and this parliamentary reform paved the way, simply hit the unity of India, right, children? So obviously unity got a severe blow. Here, separatist means here Hindu and Muslims parted their ways, and they were all come under the influence of the Britishers. Methods, they didn't understand their tricks, they didn't understand their strategies, and the best part was they have seen was what? Their representatives, their representation, right? And on the same way the Indian National Congress asked for the representation, in the same way Muslims too asked for the representation, where in the Legislative Council. They too wanted their employment, more and more employment to be employed where in the councils, in the administrative department, right, children? So now at last we come to the formation of Muslim League. At last now Muslim League means the body was founded comprised of only Muslim leaders, right, children? So here in December 1906, delegates of various provinces has assembled in Dhaka in connection with the Muslim Education Conference. The All India Muslim League was founded in Dhaka on 30th December 1906, presided by Nawab Salimullah, and under whose leadership they have simply addressed this session in the year 1906 under the leadership of Nawab Salimullah of Dhaka, right, children? And here the League Constitution was formed, and the very first time League has adopted its own rules and regulation, and they have adopted in the year 1907 at Karachi. Next, the first session held in December 1908 at Amritsar under the chairmanship of Sayyid Ali Iman, and the very first session after formation of the Muslim League happened, where it happened in Amritsar. They conducted the session in Amritsar in the year 1908 under the guidance, under the leadership of Sayyid Ali Imam, right, children? Aims. Now aims of Muslim League, obviously if you remember, Indian National Congress too has demanded, and they have kept the aims. Now in the same way Muslim leagues have demanded, and at the last now they have aimed their objectives, they simply presented in front of the Britishers. And what was their objective? Let's see now. The feeling of loyalty towards the Britisher, the very first objective was what class? Muslims always show their loyalty towards the Britishers, because obviously Britishers help them out in forming their body, so they always highly indebted to the Britishers. They simply have to follow what Britishers said, right? And if you remember, children, this was a trick of the Britishers. They only wanted this to happen in India, right? Like separation of more and more community, Hindus separated, Muslims separated, and this way they can rule for a number of years, right? They would remove misconception. Next they said ki misconception means misunderstandings. They try to remove the misunderstandings which was created in the minds of the Muslims towards the Britishers, right? That means they wanted more and more masses of the Muslims to come under the influence of the Britishers. Next, to protect the political rights, then they simply demanded the political rights to be protected. That means they wanted more representation in the legislative council, in the executive council, in the imperial legislative council. Then to place their needs and aspiration before the government, the same demand too was asked by the Indian National Congress much earlier than them, right? So this body was formed in 1906. Children, if you remember, the Indian National Congress was formed in the year 1885. Next, to prevent the rise of any hostility between Muslim and other community, and they simply wanted to prevent the differences with other community. Like simply Muslims try to show that they didn't have any differences with the other communities, with the other non-Muslims communities, right? Children, this was all the aims they have simply set for the formation of the Muslim League, right, children? Now, come on to direct results of the Muslim League. The League leaders were trying to cut off the Muslim masses from the national movement, and here the result was what class? The result was, at last what Britishers thought, what Britishers has devised and planned. They were quite successful till at the end, and what they did, what was the result of all these things? That means Muslim leaders, the League leaders were trying to cut off the Muslim masses from the national movement. Next, the Britishers were successful in sowing seeds of conflict between the two great communities, Hindu and Muslims, children. And if you remember, children, we are coming to the end of the video, and children, this way we are coming to the end of the chapter. But if you remember, if you refer to my previous videos, you can very well understand how they have implemented the divide and rule policy, how they separated Hindu and Muslim community, right? And if you remember, like after independence, in fact after this Mughal rulers come to an end, like last Mughal ruler Bahadur Shah Zafar II was exiled to Rangoon, and after that they have simply conquered, they have taken over the whole India. They were successful in that, right? And after that they simply planned this strategy, and what strategy they have followed was what? The implementation of divide and rule policy. And they knew very well if Hindu and Muslims would have united, then their survival will be tough in India, right, children? So the best example of the divide and rule policy was what? Earlier partition of Bengal, which I've already explained you in the previous video, and the next was what? Muslim League. These two things, they simply created with the help of partition of Bengal and the formation, and they helped out in forming the body which comprised of only Muslim leaders by the name of Muslim League. They were simply successful in sowing the seeds of hatred and differences among Hindu and Muslims, and they were very, very successful in that, right? And you have already seen in the videos, I've already explained you in my previous videos also, and before that also, right, children, how they have presented, how they have sowed the seeds of disunity, the differences, right? And how they implemented divide and rule policy, right, children? Divide and rule policy, they simply attacked, they simply misinterpreted history, right? And they started brainwashing the Muslims and the Hindus. They were not made for each other, they cannot survive together, and they have to part their ways. And they were very much successful. Like in partition of Bengal, they promised the Muslims to give them a separate Mohammedan province, a separate Muslim province, on one condition that Muslims would not be participating in the anti-partition movement. And Muslims agreed, right? Because their conditions was really very poor. And who was responsible for this poor condition? Obviously it was only the Britishers. So now you people have understood who has played the real politics. It was the Britishers, and simply Hindu and Muslims were the pawns in their hands, right? They were simply what they wanted, they were doing that, right? These Hindu and Muslims, without thinking that these Britishers they simply create the division among these two communities. So I hope people have understood what is it all about, right? So do listen to all these videos, previous videos, and all the videos, partition of Bengal and everything, link wise, and you will get everything. You will understand very easily what the chapters wants to say, what is in there in the depth, right, everyone? Okay, fine. Thank you, children.